So welcome to Finalising Your Class Code. In this video, what we're going to do is finish off the tank movement component altogether, make some final changes to it, sort out our to-dos, check a few things, change a few things around, and talk through why we're doing that and how that's best practice. And then movement is, well, this part of it is finished, which is great news. All right, I just want to start with this. Recently, Visual Studio has started noticing changes in this application host.config file inside my .vs folder. I can ignore that. So if you're getting a similar thing, you're welcome to add this exact file name to the gitignore. You can actually add battletank/.vs to the gitignore if you like, because we don't need anything in the .vs folder. So I'm actually going to do that to future-proof that gitignore. Let's see what it's added. If you want to add it manually, battletank/.vs/. Okay, cool. So that's the gitignore changed, which is fine. Now let's go ahead and open the project and this Visual Studio solution. And what we're going to do is finish off this tank movement component. It's pretty much done, actually. This is the first class, I think, that has come to a completion. So let's start in the code and have a bit of a review as to what's going on. Start in the header file. I'm going to work down from the top. Fill in your copyright notice in the project settings. You know what? We should do that. So settings in Unreal, project settings. And then somewhere we will have a copyright notice. Here it is. Let's fill that in. Copyright Embrace IT Limited. Great. So that won't change the file we've already created, but it will mean that future files will have something like Copyright Embrace IT Limited in them. Let's just fill that in for fun by pasting it. Okay, pragma once we leave. This is all good. Now, one of the questions, do we need this forward declaration? Well, highlighting it shows that it is used, well, you can see that it's used here, uTankTrack. So yes, we need it. We have a class description. Do we need to make this class a blueprint spawnable component? Yes. Remind ourselves why. If we look at the tank blueprint, it is so that we can add the tank movement component manually like this. We'll probably do the same thing with the aiming component soon. It is down here in our custom menu as tank movement. So we need that bit. It's necessary. So do we need to make this guy blueprint callable, the initialize? Yes, because that's where we do the initialization. If you remember, in the event graph, we initialize here by passing in references to the tank tracks. That's sensible. Do we need these guys to be blueprint callable? Intend move forward and intend turn right? Of course, because it's part of the input binding. So that's all good. Now, little hint, category. And thank you to those on the forum who've pointed this out. There's a bit of a bug in Unreal right now that means you may get some crashes because your category definer isn't in quotes. So to be safe, let's put it in quotes. That also lets you put strange characters in, like, like other characters in the middle here, if you wanted to. So I'm going to put quotes around this as I go in future. Now, we said to ourselves, let's see what protection request direct move needs. Now, if you recall, we found request direct move inside the actual engine code. I don't remember exactly where we found it, but if you go and look at it, it is a public method in the superclass in the uNav component. But it turns out here we can actually make it as protected as private, and that was very confusing. We can make it private, to not use that other word to confuse things. So we can actually make it this level of protection private, and it will still work. So let's just prove that. And that's basically because, I'll explain with a diagram. It's basically because if you look back to our diagrams to how the AI system works here, where the pathfinding logic has a hook into the request direct move method, it has a pointer to a nav movement component, not a tank movement component. And on the nav movement component, request direct move is a public method. So let's just play and prove that things still work. They do. So because the tanks are moving, request direct move must be being called. So because we can make it private, we may as well. Let's make a comment as to what this does. So method, or just say called from the pathfinding logic by the AI controllers. Okay, fantastic. So that's what's going on there. I think that the header file is looking in good shape. I'm going to save it. Now let's go through and have a look at the CPP. So copyright notice, well, fine. I will put that in. Obviously, it's good to do that in your project settings in the beginning, but I just didn't think it's the most important thing for the learning of the section exactly. This is all good. Now, what I am going to do very briefly is we need to sort out this double speed issue. I've got a way of preventing the double speed. I think what I'm going to do is just unbind these shoulder buttons. But in the before we do that and consider that a solution, let's just look at the two throws. I'm just going to say right %F, and then I'm going to say forward %F, like so, and then I'm just going to say, let's look at the right throw, and let's look at the forward throw. For all of the tanks, I just want to make sure that these tanks are only passing values between -1 and +1. So let's just have a look at those values. Turn my controller on so I can move my tank as well, so that all of the tanks are reporting their throw values. If these throws are between -1 and +1, then the easiest way to prevent doubling up on control between the left thumbstick and the shoulder buttons is just to unbind the shoulder buttons. Frankly, we don't need to be driving it from the shoulder buttons. So I'm just moving my tank forward, back, left, right. I'm going to stop, take a look at the logs, looking for anything with a 1 or beyond. It's all good. All of these throws are between -1 and +1, so I'm pretty happy with that. I'm actually going to get rid of the log entry now that we don't need it, further reducing our lines of code. And where we have a to-do prevent double speed due to dual control use, what I'm going to do is simply this. I'm going to go and remove these input bindings over in the tank blueprint. We're no longer going to bind the left and right throttle. I don't see the point. We might as well just use that fly-by-wire control. It was interesting to see how to use both of them. Of course, it is possible to make them both work together. We have to set a local variable for the throttle in the tank movement component and then consume that variable every frame. If you want to do that, it's a bit of extra credit for those of you who care, but it's going to mess up the learning journey for the less advanced people. So I think it seriously isn't worth doing. So by removing that input binding, we can now only use the left stick, but life is a lot simpler. So these two methods are just defining what the idea of moving forward and turning right does. If we ever want to make adjustments to what moving forward and turning right does, we do them in these methods here. I'm very happy now with how this whole class is looking. It's pretty tight, it's pretty clear, it reads nicely, so I'm happy. What I'm going to do before I ever commit is to compile and just have a quick play test of the game, and then start casting my mind forward to thinking, well, what is the least fun thing about this game right now? That age-old question. So that in the next video we can come in and fix that. I'm going to compile the tank blueprint, save the tank blueprint, play the game, hit F11, and just make absolutely sure that with my left stick I can control the tank. It's slippy, slidey, and in fact that is, thinking about it while I play this, probably the least fun thing about it now. I mean, it's fun, like just in the same way that Goat Simulator's fun, that these tanks slide around like crazy. And you know what? We may want to put some ice into the world and in the future play with those physics settings and set a different coefficient of friction based on the terrain paint, and then actually make maybe an ice lake. Maybe somebody wants to do that, and then we'll have some slipping and sliding if we want it. But for most of the time, I think that we need to get rid of this slipping and sliding somehow. And one of the easiest ways to do that is going to be to use a special piece of code that says, well, let's put a sideways force in that corrects this. Because if we try and do it purely with friction, then we're going to end up needing too much power to slide this tank along. Remember, this tank is only moving because we are pushing it really hard and these tracks aren't moving. They're just solid lumps sitting on the ground. So that's probably what's least fun. This bug where it keeps diving, hitting some invisible like boulder on the floor and spinning over, that's also a bit unfun, but it's still kind of fun. I'm not bored of it yet. I am a bit bored of the sideways sliding. So it's all working after compiling. I'm pretty happy with that. Let's just go ahead and close Unreal, close Visual Studio, and go ahead and commit. Hopefully you have been using your source control and doing your commits. I commit based on the name of the lecture. And do remember that you can get hold of all of my commits here at github.com/Ben Tristram and through to Unreal Course, or just straight at /Unreal Course. There's the section name. There are the commits. Clicking over here on these angle braces will allow you to get to the code state at the end of any video by cloning or downloading. So congratulations. Remember also about our new community site, community.gamedev.tv. There is a thriving Unreal section in there, which we hope to see you in with all your shares. And I will see you soon.